Hello everybody, Jeremy Siskind here. I'm the author of Solo Standards for Piano, the author of the Jazz Piano Fundamental series, and the author of Playing Solo Jazz Piano. Excuse me. Gotta clear the throat because we've got important things to talk about today. A little while ago I put out a lesson called First Lesson in Rhythm Changes, and today I want to do a follow-up, and we're going to call it the second lesson in Rhythm Changes. And in that first lesson we talked about kind of the basic principles of what is rhythm changes, what's the chord progression, what to listen for, what are some rhythm changes heads that you might learn. And we talked about improvising over that first four measures of the A section, the 1, 6, 2, 5 progression. And today I want to talk about improvising over the other parts of rhythm changes, the second half of the A section, and then also the bridge, which is kind of deceptively hard. It seems like the easiest part, and it might well be the easiest part, but it's not that easy. So just to get our ears and our brains oriented back on rhythm changes, I'm going to play a course of rhythm changes for you with some improvisation, and then we're going to dive in. So I'm not going to play any head. I'm just going to go right into the solo. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. There's one chorus of rhythm changes for you. I hope you're able to follow along and hear where the bridge is. Okay, so we're going to go over some pages in Jazz Piano Fundamentals, book number 2. That's the purple book, which I don't have at arm's length here, but you can imagine a purple book, I think. So here's 3 kind of common variations that we would see starting in bar 5 of rhythm changes, right? So this would be after we do the 1, 6, 2, 5 progression 2 times in measures 1 through 4. In bar 5, there's quite a few different ways that we might express these changes. And one of them, letter A, has an ascending bass line. Can you look at the bass and see it's B flat, D, E flat, E, F. And it, like, looked at a certain way, it's just going from a B flat chord, traveling back to a B flat chord through the 4 chord. And that's something all these are going to have in common, is that we have an E flat chord right on the downbeat of bar 2. Or letter B has a descending bass line, again from B flat to another B flat chord. Okay, so these are 2 very standard ways to express this harmony, but down on the bottom of your screen is even a third way, which has a 2, 5 to 4 instead of this kind of ascending or descending bass line. Okay. These 3 methods are really quite interchangeable. I know that looking through them, you might see vastly different seeming chords, but these are 3 more or less interchangeable things. And I'm going to show you why in just a moment. But I want to make sure to play all 3 of them because I just played the bass lines for A and B. And I want you to hear how what would be letter C and all 3 of them sound. So here's letter A. Here's letter B. And then the last one on bottom. All right, so a lot of similarity in there, but maybe some slightly different colors and some different energies based on whether we're going up or down. Now, I'm going to flip a few pages here because I want to show you why these 3 things are more or less interchangeable. So if you're following along in your Jazz Piano Fundamentals book 2, I'm on page 163. And in my mind, what these 2 bass lines, or what these different progressions are doing, is they're combining these 2 melodies, which both go from the root to the 5th. And these were the same melodies that we heard in those bass lines. So this is reflected in the chord symbols listed here. But we could also have this one I'm circling in blue, right? And when you combine these two, they express really what is at the center of that harmony. And so these are great guides for improvisation. And this is where I would start any student who is trying to improvise over those 4 measures of rhythm changes. So I've given some examples, and letter A is showing this descending line, right? And how you might embellish it using some arpeggios and some other chord tones. Right? Letter B is showing that ascending line. You can see it's actually always coming right on the beat when the chord changes. Right? And notice mainly what I'm doing is I'm arpeggiating the chord, right? This is an F here, that's the 5th of B flat. Here we're using an F again as the 5th of B flat. Did I say the wrong thing? I can't remember. Then this is just literally an E flat triad. Here's the 3rd of the chord. But I am putting in some little passing tones like do do do, right? Or ba dum ba do bum. So it's a combination of arpeggios and passing tones. Kind of a nice next step is combining those 2 lines. Can you see on top, actually let me circle the individual notes of letter C. We have that versus on bottom we have this ascending line. Okay, so this is where I would start when you're learning those measures of rhythm changes. Don't feel like you have to play exactly every chord. What you could do is you could play those 2 guide tone lines and then fill in some neutral notes that fit the key really nicely, or some notes that scoop in. So you could practice, for instance, and then right, just targeting those notes on the beat. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about the bridge, because the bridge seems easy. Just to review for a moment, I'll go back in this book. The bridge starts at bar 17 here. And all we're doing is we're going around the circle of fifths using dominant chords. And we're holding each chord for 2 whole measures or 8 beats each. Now this might seem really easy, especially compared to the A sections in which chords change every 2 beats. Right? So you got 2 beats versus 8 beats. You have a lot more time to stretch out. But, somewhat ironically, there's actually a challenge inherent in those chords lasting for so long, which is that it's a little bit difficult to think of something to do for 8 beats on these dominant chords. So what can you do? I've got some tips for you. This is page 164 of the book. So first thing that many musicians do is transpose the same 2-measure phrase so that it has a sense of logic to it. So, for instance, and let's see. I could start there. I might want to add a little pickup back into the A section. Or now, next step here, not a next step, but a variation, is that you can simply also put your motifs down by a half step. And the reason that works is because of the tritone sub. If I'm doing this for D7, then if I go down a half step, it's going to be like D flat 7 against G, and that's the tritone sub. right? Really colorful. So now you got all these beautiful alter tones, or using my other example, and I think for a lot of people, it can be easier to transpose down a half step rather than around the circle of fifths. Second suggestion that I have here, letter B, is to add minor chords to create 2/5 progressions. So if you don't want 8 beats on the same chord, instead of having a 5 chord, 5 chord, 5 chord, 5 chord, you could have the 2, 2, 3, 4, the 5. So for instance, we could have A minor 7 for a measure, followed by D7, right? A minor 7 is the 2 associated with D being the 5. And then D minor 7 to G7. And then G minor 7 to C7. You can see there's kind of a link here that the root will always repeat. So that's going to change the sound a little bit. Now, some of you might be wondering, do I need to let the bass player know? Like, does everybody in the band have to do that together? And the answer is definitely not, right? 5 chords and 2 chords use the same modes, the same scale. So it's a little bit more of a psychological thing. It might end up sounding like you're doing like a sus and then going to a dominant, and then a sus and then a dominant. Because when we play the 2, like D minor 7, for instance, over G, it sounds like a G sus, and then resolving. So, if the bass player is not doing that with you, then it might just not sound like a 2/5. It'll sound like a dominant with a suspension, and then going to a dominant chord. Now, I mentioned this thing from earlier in the book, which is the chromatic descent guide tone line. Sounds really official. And what that means is that you're going to start on, if we're thinking of G minor 7 to C, you're going to start on the root of that minor chord and then go down by half steps. You're not getting any updates on this. How about now? There we go. That's better. Right, so I'm starting on the root of G minor 7 and then going down by half steps, which is going to put me on the third of the dominant chord by the last half step. And this is kind of a common gesture in jazz. Creates a lot of motion so that now you're not sitting there for 8 beats, you're actually moving every 2 beats. Okay, so you can make it a 2/5, including using that fancy chromatic descent guide tone line, or letter C says you can use alterations to create more color on the dominant 7th chords. So a lot of students see D7 and they, not incorrectly, say, okay, I'm going to play D mixolydian for 8 beats. That's going to get really plain after a while. First of all, make sure that you're using passing tones and neighbor tones and chromatic notes. But more than that, feel free to delve into things like whole tone scales, reflecting a dominant 7th sharp 5, or octatonic scales, reflecting a dominant 7th flat 9, or altered scales, reflecting a altered dominant 7. So, dominant 7th chords are great fodder for alterations in jazz. So let me show you the examples from the book. The first one, letter A, is showing that transposition. 1, 2, 3. And I'd probably do some kind of addition or rhythmic change by the end so it's not so literally repetitive. But for the sake of educating you, there's letter A. Now letter B shows these implied minors. So I haven't changed the chord symbol, but I'm arpeggiating. Like when I say A minor implied, it's because I'm using the 3, 5, 7, 9 arpeggio of A minor, and that's pretty consistent throughout. So here's what this sounds like. pretty nice, right? Lots of motion. And then letter C is showing using some of these altered scales. So 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. Very common whenever we see a dominant chord, including in that bridge of rhythm changes, to use these kinds of colorful scales. So that's what I've got for you today in terms of second lesson in rhythm changes. So now you have a hint about how to play on measures 5 through 8 of the A section using those 2 guide tone lines. And then you've got 3, well, really I gave you more than 3 good ideas for how to deal with the bridge, how to take these, wide open 8-beat spaces and make them more colorful and more active and more interesting than just playing mixolydian. Like I said, this is all from Jazz Piano Fundamentals Book 2. I don't have it to show you. It's a purple book that just looks like this, but in purple. Jazz Piano Fundamentals Book 2, if you want to dive deeper in rhythm changes and look at these examples, there's a lot more in here for you. And if you have watched all the way to the end of the video, thank you very much for doing so. Why don't you say something using the word bridge if you made it all the way to the end? Again, the secret word today is bridge. See y'all later. Take care.